Margaret Ainsworth had always been a woman of quiet diligence, of careful planning, of unwavering faith in the simple, enduring virtues of hard work and fiscal responsibility. For 40 dedicated years, she had poured her heart and soul into teaching English literature to generations of high school students. Her classroom a sanctuary of learning, of inspiration, of a profound, infectious love for the written word. She had lived modestly, saved diligently. Her dreams for retirement not extravagant, but deeply cherished. A small cottage by the sea, perhaps, where she could finally dedicate her days to her own writing, to long walks on the beach, to the quiet, contemplative pleasures she had so long deferred in service of her students. Her career, her financial affairs, she believed, were in impeccable order, a testament to her lifelong prudence. And for the past 15 years, the careful stewardship of her hard-earned nest egg, her entire life savings, her dreams for a secure and peaceful retirement, had been entrusted to one man, Thomas Ashton. Thomas, the principal of Ashton Financial Advisory, a boutique investment firm with a gleaming office in the city's most prestigious financial district, was more than just Margaret's financial advisor. He was, she believed, a trusted friend. He had been recommended to her by a colleague years ago. His reputation sterling, his demeanor reassuringly professional, his knowledge of the complex, often bewildering world of investments seemingly encyclopedic. Over the years, their relationship had evolved from a purely professional one to something warmer, more personal. Thomas, a man in his late 40s, with a charming, avuncular manner, a ready smile, and an uncanny ability to explain complex financial jargon in simple, understandable terms, had always treated Margaret with particular kindness, a solicitous, almost filial, respect. He'd remember her birthday with a thoughtfully chosen card, inquire after her health, listen patiently to her occasional anxieties about market volatility, his calm, confident reassurances always managing to soothe her fears, to reinforce her trust in his expertise, his integrity. He'd paint glowing pictures of her financial future, his presentations filled with colorful charts and graphs, all illustrating the steady, impressive growth of her portfolio under his astute management. "Your retirement is secure, Margaret," he'd say, his voice resonating with comforting paternal authority. "More than secure. You've done exceptionally well. Thanks to your diligent saving and our prudent investment strategy, you're on track for a golden retirement indeed. That seaside cottage? It's not just a dream, Margaret. It's a certainty." Margaret, a woman whose expertise lay in the nuanced complexities of Shakespearean sonnets and Victorian novels, not in the arcane intricacies of stock options and bond yields, had placed her complete, unreserved, and ultimately, tragically misplaced faith in Thomas Ashton. She signed the documents he presented, nodded along to his confident explanations, her heart filled with gratitude for his guidance, his wisdom, his friendship. He was, she believed, her financial guardian angel, the man who would ensure that her years of hard work, of sacrifice, of diligent saving, would indeed culminate in the peaceful, secure retirement she so richly deserved. Her trust in him was absolute, unquestioning, a bedrock of her financial security, her peace of mind, a trust that, she would soon discover, was as fragile, as illusory, as a house built on sand, a trust that was about to be shattered, irrevocably, devastatingly, by a betrayal so profound, so calculated, so cruel, it would not only threaten her financial future, but would also shake her faith in human nature to its very core. The first subtle tremor in the bedrock of Margaret's unwavering trust in Thomas Ashton came not as a sudden, jarring earthquake, but as a series of small, almost imperceptible inconsistencies, like hairline cracks appearing in a once solid foundation. It began a few months after her official retirement, a milestone she had celebrated with quiet, joyful gathering of former colleagues and cherished friends, her heart filled with a mixture of nostalgia for her long, fulfilling career and a burgeoning excitement for the new chapter that lay ahead. She had, with Thomas's enthusiastic endorsement, begun to make tentative inquiries about seaside cottages, her dream of a peaceful literary retirement finally within reach. It was during one of her regular quarterly review meetings with Thomas, a ritual she had always found reassuring, that Margaret first noticed something off. The usually meticulously prepared financial reports, the ones with the colorful charts and graphs that so clearly illustrated the steady, impressive growth of her portfolio seemed different. The charts were still there, still colorful, but the data they represented felt vaguer, less specific. The usual detailed breakdowns of her individual investments, the transparent accounting of dividends, interest, and capital gains, were replaced with broader, more generalized summaries, with talk of proprietary blended funds and diversified asset allocations that, while sounding impressive, offered little in the way of concrete, verifiable detail. When Margaret, with her teacher's penchant for clarity, for precision, gently pressed for more specific information, for a clearer understanding of where exactly her money was invested, Thomas, for the first time in their long association, seemed evasive. He'd launch into complex, jargon-filled explanations about market sensitivities, about the need for confidentiality in certain high-yield investment vehicles. His usual charming, avuncular demeanor tinged with subtle, almost imperceptible, hint of impatience, of condescension. He'd pat her hand reassuringly, his smile a little too bright, his eyes not quite meeting hers, and say, "Now, Margaret, don't you worry your pretty little head about these complex financial details. That's what you pay me for, isn't it? To handle the nitty-gritty, so you can focus on enjoying your well-deserved retirement. Rest assured, your investments are performing exceptionally well. Exceptionally well." Margaret, though momentarily unsettled by his uncharacteristic evasiveness, his subtle dismissal of her legitimate questions, initially attributed it to her own lack of financial sophistication. Perhaps these new investment strategies were indeed too complex for her to fully grasp. Perhaps she was being overly anxious, overly inquisitive. Thomas had, after all, managed her money impeccably for 15 years. He had earned her trust. She chided herself for her fleeting doubts, for her uncharacteristic lack of faith in his expertise, his integrity. But the unease, once planted, began to grow like a persistent, unwelcome weed in the otherwise carefully tended garden of her peace of mind. She started to notice other small, unsettling anomalies. The quarterly statements, which had always arrived with clockwork punctuality, began to be delayed, sometimes by weeks, their arrival often preceded by a series of increasingly anxious, increasingly unreturned phone calls from Margaret to Thomas's office. When the statements finally did arrive, they were often accompanied by a hastily scribbled, overly effusive apology from Thomas, blaming administrative backlogs or unexpected staffing issues for the delay. His reassurances about the continued stellar performance of her portfolio feeling a little too forced, a little too desperate. Her requests for withdrawals, small sums she needed for unexpected expenses, for planned travel, were also met with uncharacteristic delays, with a frustrating series of bureaucratic hurdles. Thomas, who had always prided himself on his firm's efficiency, its client-centric approach, now seemed strangely inaccessible. His once prompt replies to her emails became sporadic. His explanations for the delays in processing her withdrawal requests vague, convoluted, often contradictory. He'd cite market liquidity issues, regulatory compliance checks, unforeseen processing delays, his excuses always plausible on the surface, but collectively, creating a disturbing pattern of obfuscation, of evasion, of a growing, inexplicable reluctance to release her own money to her. Margaret, a woman of quiet determination, of unwavering persistence, refused to be easily placated, to be dismissed with vague reassurances and condescending platitudes. Her life savings, her dreams for retirement were at stake, and the gnawing, insidious fear that something was terribly, terribly wrong was beginning to overshadow her ingrained trust, her natural inclination to believe the best of people, especially of Thomas Ashton, the man she had considered not just her financial advisor, but her friend. She began to keep meticulous records of every interaction, every phone call, every email, every delayed statement, every frustratingly evasive response. Her teacher's mind, trained in the art of critical analysis, of discerning patterns, of identifying inconsistencies, was now focused, with a growing, reluctant suspicion, on the man to whom she had entrusted her entire financial future. The evidence, though circumstantial, was mounting, painting a disturbing picture of a financial advisor who was, at best, becoming increasingly incompetent, increasingly disorganized, and at worst, Margaret dared not even articulate the thought, something far more sinister, far more deceptive, The breaking point came when Margaret decided to make a more substantial withdrawal, a down payment for the small seaside cottage she had finally found, the cottage that represented the culmination of her lifelong dreams, the tangible symbol of her hard-earned, secure retirement. She had discussed it with Thomas months earlier, his enthusiasm seemingly genuine, his reassurances about the availability of her funds unwavering. But now, when she formally requested the withdrawal, a significant but by no means excessive portion of her portfolio, Thomas's response was not just allayed. It was alarming. He didn't return her calls for days. His usually attentive assistant, a young woman named Sarah who had always been so helpful, so efficient, now sounded flustered, evasive, offering a series of increasingly implausible excuses for Thomas's unavailability. When Margaret finally, through sheer unyielding persistence, managed to get Thomas on the phone, his voice, usually so calm, so confident, so reassuring, was strained, agitated, almost panicked. He told her, his words tumbling out in a rush, that her funds were temporarily inaccessible, tied up in a highly lucrative short-term, offshore investment opportunity that he claimed, secured exclusively for his most valued clients, an opportunity that promised unprecedented returns but required a brief holding period for regulatory reasons. He assured her it was a temporary situation, a minor inconvenience, that her money was perfectly safe, safer than ever, in fact, and that it would be available with substantial profits in just a few short weeks. He urged her to be patient, to trust his judgment, to not rock the boat by making inquiries that might jeopardize this once-in-a-lifetime investment opportunity. His explanation, so convoluted, so filled with red flags, so utterly at odds with conservative, risk-averse investment strategy he had always espoused for her retirement funds, did not reassure Margaret. It terrified her. Offshore investments, proprietary blended funds, regulatory holding periods. This was not the language of secure, prudent retirement planning. This was the language of something else, something dangerous, something fraudulent. The seaside cottage, her dream, her symbol of security, suddenly felt impossibly, agonizingly out of reach. The trust she had placed in Thomas Ashton, the faith she had had in his integrity, his expertise, his friendship, crumbled, leaving behind a gaping, terrifying void of fear, of uncertainty, of a dawning, sickening realization that her entire life savings, her future, her dreams, might be in grave, imminent jeopardy. Margaret Ainsworth, the quiet, diligent teacher, the prudent, careful saver, the trusting, loyal friend, was no fool. She knew, with a certainty that chilled to the bone, that she could no longer rely on Thomas Ashton's reassurances, his explanations, his carefully constructed facade of professional competence, of personal concern. She needed answers, real answers, and she needed them now, before it was too late, before her lifelong dream of a peaceful, secure retirement dissolved into a nightmare of financial ruin, of devastating, irreparable betrayal. Margaret's decision to seek outside help, to hire an independent auditor, was not made lightly. It felt like betrayal in itself, a tacit admission that her 15 years of unwavering trust in Thomas Ashton had been, at best, grievously misplaced, at worst, a catastrophic, life-altering mistake. But the fear, the gnawing, insidious certainty that something was profoundly, fundamentally wrong with her financial affairs, had become too powerful to ignore, too terrifying to dismiss with wishful thinking or misplaced loyalty. She could no longer afford to be the trusting, naive Margaret who blindly accepted Thomas's glib reassurances, his condescending platitudes. She needed to be Margaret the pragmatist, Margaret the investigator, Margaret the woman who would fight, with every ounce of her quiet, steely determination, to protect her future, her dignity, her hard-earned life savings. Finding a reputable independent auditor, one with no ties to Ashton Financial Advisory, one with a proven track record of uncovering financial malfeasance, took several weeks of discreet, painstaking research. Margaret, drawing on the same meticulous research skills she had honed over decades of preparing lesson plans and grading student essays, delved into online forums, consulted with consumer protection agencies, and even, with considerable degree of trepidation, sought anonymous advice from a legal aid society. She was looking for someone with expertise, with integrity, but also, crucially, with discretion. The last thing she wanted was to alert Thomas to her suspicions, to give him an opportunity to cover his tracks, to further obfuscate the truth, if indeed, as she increasingly, terrifyingly feared, there was a truth to be hidden. She finally settled on a firm called Veritas Financial Forensics, a small, highly specialized outfit with a reputation for tenacity, for thoroughness, for an unwavering commitment to uncovering financial truth, however complex, however well-concealed. The principal, a woman named Eleanor Vance, was a former forensic accountant with the SEC. Her demeanor sharp, professional, her eyes missing nothing, her questions incisive, probing. Margaret, in their initial consultation, found herself, for the first time in months, feeling a flicker of hope, a sense that she was no longer alone in this terrifying, bewildering ordeal. Eleanor Vance listened to Margaret's story, to her litany of concerns, the vague reports, the delayed statements, the inaccessible funds, Thomas's increasingly evasive, agitated behavior. With a calm, focused intensity, her expression unreadable, but her attention unwavering. Mrs. Ainsworth, Eleanor said finally, her voice devoid of false sympathy, but filled with a quiet, professional reassurance. Your concerns are significant and, unfortunately, not uncommon. Financial advisors, like any professionals, operate on trust, and when that trust is breached, the consequences can be devastating. We will need full access to all your financial records, your statement from Ashton Financial, your tax returns, any correspondence you've had with Mr. Ashton. The more information you can provide, the more thoroughly and quickly we can conduct our investigation. Margaret, armed with a carefully compiled dossier of every financial document she possessed, every email, every note she had meticulously taken during her increasingly unsettling interactions with Thomas, provided Eleanor Vance with everything she requested. Handing over those documents, those tangible symbols of her financial life, her hopes, her dreams, felt like surrendering a part of herself, a part of her carefully constructed, now terrifyingly fragile, future. But it also felt like a necessary, empowering step, a reclaiming of agency, a refusal to remain a passive victim in what she increasingly feared was a sophisticated, calculated, and utterly devastating financial deception. The weeks that followed were an agony of suspense, of anxious waiting. Eleanor Vance and her team at Veritas worked diligently, meticulously, poring over years of financial statements, tracing complex webs of transactions, cross-referencing data, searching for anomalies, for red flags, for the telltale signs of financial malfeasance. Margaret tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy, to distract herself with her books, her gardening, her correspondence with former students. But the fear, the uncertainty, the constant, gnawing anxiety about what the audit might reveal was a heavy, suffocating weight on her heart, a dark cloud overshadowing her every waking moment. She avoided all contact with Thomas Ashton, a feat that became increasingly difficult as he, perhaps sensing her withdrawal, her suspicion, began to call with increasing frequency, his voice a mixture of feigned concern, of forced joviality, of an underlying, almost palpable desperation. He'd leave long, rambling messages, inquiring about her health, her retirement activities, offering unsolicited, overly optimistic updates on the supposed performance of her exclusive offshore investment. His reassurances now sounding hollow false, almost sinister. Margaret listened to his messages with a growing sense of revulsion, her once warm feelings of friendship, of trust, replaced by a cold, sickening certainty that this man, this charming, avuncular, seemingly trustworthy man, was a liar, a charlatan, a predator who had systematically, ruthlessly betrayed her trust, stolen her future. The call from Eleanor Vance came on a gray, drizzly Tuesday afternoon, the kind of afternoon that mirrored the bleakness, the despair that had become Margaret's constant companion. Mrs. Ainsworth. Eleanor's voice was calm, professional, but with an undercurrent of grim seriousness that made Margaret's heart pound, her breath catch in her throat. We've completed our preliminary audit. I think it would be best if you came into our office as soon as possible to discuss our findings. And perhaps, she added, her voice softening almost imperceptibly, you might want to bring a friend or a family member with you for support. Margaret knew, in that instant, that her worst fears, her most terrifying suspicions, were about to be confirmed. She arranged to meet Eleanor the following morning, her hands trembling so violently she could barely hold the phone. She considered calling her niece, her closest living relative, but decided against it. This was her burden, her ordeal. She would face it alone, with the same quiet courage, the same steely determination that had defined her life, her career, her character. The meeting in Eleanor Vance's office was a blur of incomprehensible financial jargon, of complex spreadsheets, of stark, undeniable, and utterly devastating numbers. But the conclusion, when Eleanor finally, gently delivered it, was chillingly, heartbreakingly clear. Thomas Ashton had not just mismanaged Margaret's money. He had systematically, deliberately, and criminally stolen it. Mrs. Ainsworth, Eleanor said, her voice filled with a quiet, professional compassion, "I'm so sorry to have to tell you this, but our audit reveals a consistent, long-term pattern of fraudulent activity by Mr. Ashton. He has been systematically diverting funds from your account, from the account of other clients as well, it appears, into a series of shell corporations, personal accounts, and highly speculative, often entirely fictitious, investments. The exclusive offshore investment opportunity he described to you, it doesn't exist. It was fabrication, a lie, designed to stall for time, to further conceal his theft." Eleanor went on to detail the extent of the fraud, the complex web of deception Thomas had woven over years, the sheer, breathtaking audacity of his betrayal. He had falsified statements, forged signatures, created phantom investments, all while maintaining his charming, trustworthy facade, his solicitous concern for Margaret's well-being, her financial security. He had, in essence, plundered her life savings, her retirement dream, leaving behind a hollowed-out shell of an investment portfolio, its value a tiny, almost insignificant fraction of what Margaret had believed, what Thomas had so confidently, so deceitfully assured her it was worth. The numbers were staggering. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Gone. Vanished. Stolen. Margaret listened, her face pale, her expression numb, her mind struggling to comprehend the enormity of the betrayal, the catastrophic, life-altering consequences of Thomas Ashton's greed, his duplicity, his utter, contemptible lack of conscience. The seaside cottage, her symbol of peace, of security, of a well-deserved rest after a lifetime of hard work, dissolved into a cruel, mocking mirage. Her future, once so carefully planned, so confidently anticipated, now stretched before her a bleak, terrifying landscape of uncertainty, of financial ruin, of a trust so profoundly, so devastatingly shattered, she wondered if it could ever, in any way, be repaired. What do I do now?" she whispered, her voice barely audible, her carefully constructed composure finally, heartbreakingly, beginning to crumble. Eleanor Vance reached across the desk, her hand covering Margaret's trembling one with a gesture of unexpected and deeply appreciated human warmth. "Now, Mrs. Ainsworth," she said, her voice firm, resolute, "now we fight back. We take this evidence to the authorities. We expose Thomas Ashton for the criminal he is. And we do everything in our power to recover what he has stolen from you, from his other victims. It won't be easy. It won't be quick. But you are not alone in this. We will help you every step of the way." Margaret looked at Eleanor, at the strong, capable, compassionate woman who had, in a matter of weeks, uncovered the devastating truth that had been so cleverly, so cruelly concealed from her for years. And in Eleanor's eyes, in her quiet determination, her unwavering commitment to justice, Margaret found a flicker, a tiny, fragile spark, of something she thought she might never feel again. Hope. Hope that, even in the face of such profound betrayal, such devastating loss, there might still be a path forward, a way to reclaim not just her money, but her dignity, her strength, her unwavering belief in the ultimate, enduring power of truth. The confrontation with Thomas Ashton was, for Margaret, one of the most difficult, yet strangely empowering moments of her life. Armed with the irrefutable evidence compiled by Veritas Financial Forensics, and accompanied by Eleanor Vance, whose calm, professional presence was a source of immense strength, Margaret walked into Ashton Financial Advisory, not as a trusting, naive client she had once been, but as a woman wronged, a woman betrayed, a woman determined to reclaim her dignity, her future, her voice. Thomas, when summoned to a conference room where Margaret and Eleanor awaited him, initially tried to maintain his charming, avuncular facade. He greeted Margaret with an overly effusive, almost desperate warmth, inquiring about her health, her retirement, his eyes, however, darting nervously towards Eleanor, a woman whose reputation in the financial forensics world clearly preceded her. He attempted to dismiss their concerns, to launch into his usual litany of vague reassurances, of complex, jargon-filled explanations. But Eleanor Vance, with a cool, unwavering authority, cut him short. "Mr. Ashton," she said, her voice devoid of emotion, her gaze direct, unyielding, "we are not here to discuss market fluctuations or proprietary investment strategies. We are here to discuss fraud. Your fraud. We have conducted a thorough forensic audit of Mrs. Ainsworth's accounts, and the evidence of your criminal activity, your systematic embezzlement, your falsification of records, your creation of fictitious investments is irrefutable, and I might add extensive." She then proceeded, with a calm, meticulous precision, to lay out the damning evidence, spreadsheet by spreadsheet, transaction by transaction, revealing the full, shocking extent of Thomas's treachery. Thomas's charming facade began to crumble, his confident demeanor dissolving into a pasty, sweat-sheen panic. He stammered, he blustered, he denied. He attempted to shift blame, to discredit the audit, to paint Margaret as a confused, ungrateful, financially illiterate old woman who simply didn't understand complexities of high finance. But his protestations, his lies, his desperate attempts at manipulation were no match for the cold, hard, undeniable facts, for irrefutable evidence of his greed, his duplicity, his utter, contemptible betrayal. Margaret, who had remained silent throughout Eleanor's presentation, her heart pounding, her emotions a maelstrom of anger, grief, and a strange, almost surreal sense of detachment, finally spoke. Her voice, though quiet, resonated with strength, a clarity, a moral authority that seemed to fill the room, to silence Thomas's desperate, pathetic blustering. "Thomas," she said, her gaze meeting his, not with hatred, not with fury, but with profound, soul-weary disappointment, "I trusted you. For 15 years, I trusted you with my life savings, with my dreams, with my future. I considered you a friend. And you stole from me. You lied to me. You betrayed me, not just financially, but personally, deeply. And for that, there is no excuse, no justification, no forgiveness." Her words, so simple, so direct, so devastatingly true, seemed to deflate Thomas completely. He slumped in his chair, his face ashen, his eyes, for the first time, reflecting not arrogance, not manipulation, but a dawning, terrifying realization of the consequences of his actions, the ruin he had brought not just upon his clients, but upon himself, his career, his reputation, his life. Eleanor Vance then outlined the steps they would be taking, reporting their findings to the Securities and Exchange Commission, to the District Attorney's Office, to every relevant regulatory and law enforcement agency. She informed Thomas that they would be pursuing both criminal charges and civil litigation, seeking not just a recovery of Margaret's stolen funds, but punitive damages, a public reckoning for his crimes, for his betrayal. Thomas Ashton, the charming, confident, respected financial advisor, left that conference room a broken man, his future, like that of his victims, in ruins. The news of his fraudulent activities, when it finally broke, sent shockwaves to the financial community, through the quiet, trusting world of his many clients, most of whom, like Margaret, were retirees, vulnerable individuals who had placed their life savings, their trust, their dreams in the hands of a man who had proven to be a ruthless, unconscionable predator. Margaret, in the aftermath of the confrontation, of the initial reporting of Thomas's crimes, felt a strange mixture of exhaustion, of relief, of a profound, lingering sadness. The battle for justice, she knew, was far from over. There would be legal proceedings, depositions, court appearances, a long, arduous process of trying to recover what had been stolen, of trying to rebuild a future that had been so cruelly, so devastatingly derailed. But she also felt a renewed sense of purpose, of strength, of a quiet, unwavering determination to see this through, not just for herself, but for all of Thomas Ashton's victims, for all those whose trust had been so cynically, so callously betrayed. She decided, with Eleanor Vance's encouragement to take her story public, not for fame, not for notoriety, but for a different kind of justice. The justice of exposure, of warning, of empowering others to protect themselves from predators like Thomas Ashton. She agreed to an interview with a respected investigative journalist, a journalist known for her tenacity, her integrity, her commitment to exposing financial fraud, to giving voice to the victims of white-collar crime. The expose, when it was published, was a sensation. A front-page story in a national newspaper, a detailed, damning account of Thomas Ashton's crimes, his manipulation, his betrayal, featuring Margaret's courageous, compelling, and deeply moving personal story. The article was picked up by other media outlets, by television news programs, by online financial forums, sparking a national conversation about financial literacy, about the vulnerability of seniors to investment fraud, about the urgent need for greater transparency, greater accountability in the financial advisory industry. As a result of the expose, dozens of other victims of Thomas Ashton came forward, their stories eerily similar to Margaret's. The charming, trustworthy advisor, the vague reports, the delayed statements, the inaccessible funds, the devastating discovery of financial ruin, the collective weight of their testimony, their evidence, their shared outrage, added irrefutable momentum to the legal proceedings against Thomas. He was arrested, charged with multiple count of fraud, embezzlement, securities violations. His assets were frozen, his licenses revoked, his once respected name now synonymous with greed, with deception, with betrayal. The legal battle was long, arduous, emotionally draining. Margaret, though often exhausted, though frequently discouraged by the slow, frustrating pace of the justice system, never wavered in her determination. She testified at Thomas's trial, her voice clear, her gaze steady. Her account of betrayal a powerful, damning indictment of his character, his crimes. She sat through weeks of complex financial testimony, of legal wrangling, of Thomas's desperate, ultimately futile, attempts to evade responsibility, to portray himself as a victim of circumstance, of market forces, of his own supposed naivete. In the end, justice, though slow, though imperfect, prevailed. Thomas Ashton was found guilty on all counts, sentenced to a lengthy prison term. His life of luxury, of deception, of preying on the vulnerable, reduced to the stark, unforgiving reality of a prison cell. A significant portion of his ill-gotten gains, though not all, was recovered, painstakingly distributed among his many victims, including Margaret. It wasn't enough to fully restore what had been stolen, to erase the financial devastation, the emotional trauma he had inflicted, but it was something, a measure of restitution, a symbol of accountability, a testament to the power, truth, of courage, of an ordinary woman's extraordinary determination to fight for justice, not just for herself, but for all those whose lives have been so cruelly, so callously, impacted by one man's insatiable greed, his profound, unforgivable betrayal. For Margaret Ainsworth, the journey from trusting client to empowered advocate was a profound, life-altering transformation. The seaside cottage, her original dream, remained for now out of reach. But in its place, she found a new dream, a new purpose, a new, unexpected chapter in her life. She became a passionate, articulate, and incredibly effective advocate for financial literacy, particularly for seniors, for those most vulnerable to the sophisticated, predatory tactics of financial fraudsters like Thomas Ashton. She shared her story, not with bitterness, not with self-pity, but with a quiet dignity, a compelling honesty, a teacher's gift for making complex issues understandable, relatable, empowering. She spoke at community centers, at retirement homes, at financial literacy workshops. Her message simple but profound: trust but verify. Ask questions. Demand transparency. Don't be intimidated by jargon, by condescension, by false reassurances. Be your own best advocate. Protect your future. Protect your dreams. Her work, her advocacy, her courage earned her national recognition, a platform she used not for personal gain, but to amplify her message, to effect real, meaningful change. She testified before congressional committees, advocating for stronger consumer protection laws, for greater regulatory oversight of the financial advisory industry, for harsher penalties for those who prey on the vulnerable, who betray the sacred trust placed in them by their clients. Margaret Ainsworth never got her seaside cottage, but she found something far more valuable, far more enduring: a voice, a purpose, a legacy of courage, of resilience, of an unwavering commitment to truth, to justice, to empowering others to protect themselves from the devastating consequences of financial betrayal. She had faced the darkest side of human nature, the devastating impact of greed, of deception, of a trust so profoundly, so cruelly violated. And she had emerged not unscathed, not unchanged, but stronger, wiser, more determined than ever to make a difference, to ensure that her story, her ordeal, her ultimate triumph over betrayal, would serve as a beacon of hope, of warning, of empowerment for generations to come. Her life, once defined by the quiet pursuit of literary beauty, of academic excellence, was now defined by a different kind of beauty, a different kind of excellence. The beauty of resilience, the excellence of advocacy, the quiet, enduring power of a single, ordinary woman who, when faced with extraordinary betrayal, chose not to be a victim, but a warrior, a truth-teller, a champion for justice. And in that choice, in that transformation, Margaret Ainsworth found a peace, a fulfillment, a sense of purpose that no seaside cottage, however idyllic, however longed for, could ever have provided. She had lost her life savings, her retirement dream, her faith in a trusted friend, but she had found herself, her voice, her strength, and in the end that, she knew, was a victory far more precious, far more profound than any financial portfolio, however large, however secure, could ever represent.